Welcome back to the garden, guys. It's me, Peaches. This is going to be the first episode of a subcategory, I suppose, of the garden called the Black Rose, where I am going to be focusing on murder mysteries that involve women. First episode is going to be about Gypsy Rose, and I'm going to put this into two separate parts. First part, we're going to go over the past, the history of Gypsy Rose, kind of touch on her mother, Dee Dee, and then we're going to lead into her relationship with Nick Godejohn up until the point to where they decide that they are going to kill her mother. From there, the second point, we'll lead into the murder and then talk about their interviews because their interviews are absolutely wild to watch. I have my little Kindle scribe here because I made a plethora of notes that I just cannot memorize, and I would rather be accurate with my information versus just spewing what I think I remember. So, of course, before we jump into Gypsy Rose, we need to talk about her mother, Dee Dee. Her real name is Claudine. She was not born Blanchard. She was born Pitre, I believe, is how you pronounce that. And of course, we will never know what happened in Dee Dee's past. Parents will never willingly admit to abuse or neglect. So there is not a lot on Dee Dee's childhood known to the world. What we know is what her family has come out and said after the fact. We do know that she grew up lying a lot. She would steal from her parents as payback for not getting her way. She was writing bad checks. She committed credit card fraud, petty theft, and she also stole $3,000 to $4,000 from her father. A lot of people like to compare Dee Dee to her mother, who I believe is named as Emma. I do have it in my notes somewhere down the line. Emma also led a life of petty theft, lying, stealing money, check fraud. So they do like to compare the two in a sense. Into Dee Dee's adulthood, she was noted to be very manipulative. She was a smooth talker in sorts. She knew how to get her way, and she knew how to talk her way out of things. She met Rod mid-90s. There was really no clarification on when they met. Rod was 17 years old. Dee Dee was 24. They dated for about 6 months before she became pregnant with Gypsy and gave birth to Gypsy on July 27th in 1991. Shortly before Gypsy's birth, Rod had turned 18, and he woke up on his 18th birthday, and he was just kind of pondering his life. He was like, what am I doing here? Why am I with this woman? He had the realization that he wasn't really in love with her, that she became pregnant while they were dating, and he felt he had to marry her to do the right thing. He woke up and decided to leave. So, towards the end of 91, they move in with Dee Dee's father and stepmother. So I'm not sure how long they're living there for. At some point, Dee Dee's mother becomes ill. Dee Dee volunteers to take care of her mother because she's a certified CNA. Some rumbling started happening within the family on Dee Dee's treatment of her mother, Emma. Emma passes away June 9th, 1997 at 11:47 a.m., and that is all that we know about Emma's death. There was no autopsy done. At least there was no autopsy report that I could find. And they started speculating that as a form of punishment, Dee Dee was slowly starving her mother, and she eventually passed away from that. After her mother passed away, Dee Dee's stepmother, Laura, became ill. And she was bedridden for 9 months. Everybody thought that she was terminally ill, that she was not going to bounce back from this, that they were counting the months that they had left with her. And then Dee Dee moved out. Dee Dee and Gypsy moved to Springfield, Missouri, I believe, or it was Aurora, Missouri before they went to Springfield. And after Dee Dee left, Laura made a miraculous recovery. She was fine again. The reason that Dee Dee and Gypsy moved out of her father and stepmother's house is because there were accusations of Dee Dee's treatment of Gypsy not being that of a good mother. And then people also started speculating that Dee Dee was poisoning Laura with Roundup. Can't be proven. It was just pure family speculation. They also had a lot of talk about how filthy of a person Dee Dee was. There weren't really any claims of she was a hoarder, but she really did not live very well. Dee Dee's father, Claude, said that Dee Dee was an okay daughter growing up. And he feels, after what has happened with Gypsy and everything coming to light, that she got what she deserved. Because of Dee Dee's actions in life, nobody wanted to claim her ashes after she passed away, so they ended up flushing her down a toilet. When I read that, I was kind of flabbergasted. I get it, though. I have a friend who has her uncle's ashes in the trunk of her car because nobody in her family wants to claim him because of the foul shit he did in his life. I couldn't imagine just waking up one day, finding out a family member has done decades of child abuse to their child, and then being handed their ashes and be like, okay, figure it out. So that was just some background on Dee Dee, the things that were said about her, the speculations about what she could have done to her mother and her stepmother. She has a history of just being known for not being a good person. So now we're going to dive into Gypsy's medical history. So starting at 3 months old, Dee Dee claimed that Gypsy had sleep apnea. So at 3 months old, she started sleeping with a breathing machine. I'm not sure what the age was, but Rod confirmed that she had a feeding tube placed while she was still an infant. And every fever that Gypsy had was a trip to the hospital. Dee Dee was absolutely worried that she was going to die, she was going to overheat, they wouldn't be able to bring the fever down. And that was the first steps of a very long history of hospital trips, surgeries, in my view, overreacting, and a lot of overprotectiveness. In 1996, at 5 years old, Gypsy falls off of her grandfather's motorcycle, scrapes her knee. Dee Dee has an absolute meltdown. You can see the bone. She's going to lose her leg. I need to take her to the hospital. If I don't take her to the hospital, she's going to get gangrene. She's going to pass away. She's going to go septic. Whole family is like, what are you talking about? Spray it with some Neosporin, smack a Band-Aid on it, and let her keep going playing. Dee Dee was not having it. Rod also said that that was the point that he recognized things just took off from there. Whatever could be had by a child, Gypsy had it. In 1999, at 8 years old, Dee Dee claims that Gypsy Rose was diagnosed with leukemia. Gypsy is not sure when her mother started shaving her head. She just recalls her mother saying, because of the cancer, the hair is going to fall out anyway, so let's just keep it nice and neat. 2001, at 10 years old, Gypsy is treated for muscular dystrophy, even though every single test came back negative. The doctors can look at Gypsy and say she has muscle in her leg. There is absolutely no reason that she shouldn't be walking. Rod said at this point when she was 10 years old, that is when Dee Dee really started restricting her to the wheelchair only. If she ever got out of the wheelchair, it was a massive meltdown, according to Gypsy. I couldn't imagine. There are parents out there who have children who are bound to wheelchairs due to birth defects and an unfortunate accident. And they are doing everything that they can to ensure that their child is able to experience life like a child who can run, a child who can walk. Dee Dee took that away from Gypsy for 14 years. Blows my mind. Also, by this point, at second grade, Dee Dee has decided to remove Gypsy from school. She has started homeschooling her. Big advocate for homeschooling. This is absolutely terrible, though. Talk about the isolation that happens, the seclusion. She really can fully have her claws in Gypsy at this point. There is nobody else in her life who can make her question, oh, well, why can't you eat that? Or if she's at school and they see her leg move or she decides to get up out of her wheelchair at school, whole thing's blown up. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things because at this point I couldn't really find what time frame things were allegedly taking place when they were diagnosed. According to Rod and Gypsy, Dee Dee claimed over the years that Gypsy had a chromosome disorder, she had asthma, she was allergic to sugar, she was mentally stunted, had a mental retardation, so she had a learning disability. Dee Dee claimed that Gypsy, according to Rod, claimed that Gypsy was always 5 years behind her actual age. So if she was 15, she was actually at the mental age of a 9 or a 10-year-old. Other sources said that Dee Dee claimed that Gypsy was just permanently at the mental state of a 7-year-old. Another thing that just absolutely blows my mind, why would you want to hinder your child from gaining as much knowledge as they can in this universe? There are times, I understand why Gypsy did what she did. I understand why Nick helped her. There are times that I think at any point in a public setting, Gypsy could have just stood up and walked out of that wheelchair and would have blown everything up, and Dee Dee would have been arrested. Part of me really, really wants to know Dee Dee's mindset in all of this. Because as a mother, the connectors are not there for any of it to make sense to me. Dee Dee also claimed that Gypsy was vision and hearing impaired, that she had epilepsy and a heart murmur. So because of all of these ailments that Gypsy had, her and her mother were getting massive donations. They were getting trips with Make-A-Wish. They were getting backstage passes for Miranda Lambert. She was able to meet some of her favorite actors like Elijah Wood. She was getting paid trips to Disneyland. The family was really benefiting in a lot of aspects because Gypsy was sick. One of those benefits was also a house built by Habitat for Humanity in Springfield, Missouri. This house was designed to meet every disability that Gypsy had. There was a ramp for her wheelchair to get into. They had easy access restrooms, like a very spacious restroom so she can get a wheelchair in there, be able to get into the bath easily, go to the restroom. And everybody in the community, she lived in a cul-de-sac. The people that lived in that cul-de-sac helped build that house for them. And like I said, the house was free. So they moved to Springfield, Missouri in 2005. And they moved to Missouri because they claimed that their house was destroyed in Katrina. And in Hurricane Katrina, Dee Dee said that they lost all of Gypsy's medical records. Super believable lie. Hurricanes, natural disaster, absolute devastation. A lot of things are lost. Also gives Dee Dee an absolute clean slate. There is nothing to refer to. There are no notes from other doctors saying that she looked unsure of herself or she didn't know the history of the family well, right? So I'm going to touch on a couple of other things outside of the medical history that was going on during this time frame before Gypsy met Nick. So Rod would try to be an involved father in Gypsy's life. Dee Dee made sure that that did not happen. Rod would try to call for birthdays. He would try to visit her every once in a while, and Dee Dee would shut it down majority of the time. On Gypsy's 18th birthday, again, Dee Dee said, don't tell her how old she is. She doesn't know she's 18. And Rod questioned that. He was like, why would I? It's her 18th birthday. That's a massive milestone. Dee Dee was like, well, she can't handle that. The doctors have told her she would live to 18. She wouldn't live much past that. It would be too much for her to handle. She can't mentally process that. She's at the mental age of a 13-year-old. You can't do that to her. So he went along with it. He had a normal conversation, then hung up the phone. Knowing what we know now, for Dee Dee to tell Rod, don't tell her she's 18, she made sure that Gypsy stayed a child. If Gypsy believed that she was a minor, she didn't have any power over herself. Of course, children have rights to their bodies and all of those things. But legally, until you're 18, unless you're emancipated, you can't just leave your parents' home. In this time frame, because Gypsy was so isolated, she really only had TV to keep her occupied. So she was obsessed with Disney. She loved Disney princesses. She would dress up like a Disney characters, all of the wigs, all the flowy dresses. And she is a very petite woman, so she looked like a child, especially in her wheelchair covered with stuffed animals and blankets, dressed up like Cinderella with a tiara. She really looked like a child. I don't know if that was by design to make her appear more childlike, or if that was an escape for Gypsy, like she could dress up like a princess and be somebody else for a little bit. That's just crazy. All of this whole case is just a lot to process. The psychology of it, the feelings in it, the emotions, the way that humans are on like a primal level of things. It's a lot. There is a video of Gypsy Rose that Dee Dee took as like a home video of them in Missouri. It's a snowy day. And there's a couple of inches of snow, and Gypsy is sitting on like a wooden rail on the ramp up to the house. And she says something along the lines of, I'm about to jump into a pile of snow, and she falls off and she lands in the snow and she's doing her thing, having fun. And in this video, you see her scoop her arm up under her knees to move her legs, and she puts her legs down and she's doing her thing. And you can see her actively moving her legs. And once she recognizes that she's moving her legs by themselves, you see her scoop them up underneath again to move them the other way. If people had just studied that video a little bit more when it came out, or when she was sharing it with family members, they could have saved Gypsy years of child abuse. Another thing that Gypsy had to live with in this time frame is every single night she had to have a breathing machine. And something that she noticed with this breathing machine, that it was never really helping her breathe. And in fact, it was making her breathing worse. She doesn't know what kind of medication her mother was putting in there. She also, through the feeding tube, would receive medications. And she would say, I wouldn't have to be awake for that. My mom could put whatever she wanted into my body and I would never know. Absolutely terrifying. A direct quote from Gypsy was, I really wouldn't even have to be awake, so she could put whatever in my body and I wouldn't even know. I was pretty close to that. Between 2005 and 2014, Gypsy had over 100 hospital visits. And within those visits, she almost had some sort of operation going on, which is another thing I can't fathom, because as a doctor, you are trained to see things. You're trained to look at an x-ray. You're trained to look at MRIs. You're trained to look at the human body. I understand that Dee Dee had her on multiple medications, and those medications interacting with each other could create symptoms of what the doctors thought they were treating. And there were two doctors who really sat down and were like, okay, what is going on? This doesn't make any sense to me. She clearly has muscle in her legs. They're not dystrophied. She doesn't need the feeding tube. It looks like she can eat. There's nothing wrong with her throat, nothing wrong with her esophagus. And both times doctors started saying something, Dee Dee just moved on from them. And because they were so well known within their medical community, any doctor that tried to say something against them, other doctors would be like, what are you talking about? They're known, they're loved. Dee Dee would never do something like that. Of course, Gypsy is sick. I mean, look at her. Of course, I'm not a doctor. As a doctor, though, I would question looking at the medication she's on. If she doesn't have muscular dystrophy, I'm not sure if there's any medications for that, if there's any treatments for that help people. If she were on medication for muscular dystrophy, and she clearly does not have muscular dystrophy, why wasn't that medication discontinued? Leukemia is a cancer I'm almost certain has to be tested regularly. Unless Dee Dee was lying about the chemo medication that she was giving to Gypsy and was just injecting her with something else. But then again, Dee Dee is openly claiming to the public that Gypsy has leukemia. So the doctors treating her would have had to known that Dee Dee is claiming this. It would have taken, I'm sure, a couple of simple tests, to determine whether or not Gypsy had leukemia. Whole thing is just crazy. And I keep saying that because it's a lot for me to process. Not crazy in the derogatory term. It's how does one process this information presented to them, because this is a real life situation. At these doctor visits, Gypsy always had some sort of doll with her, a stuffed animal, some sort of comfort creature like a child would have. So in 2014, Gypsy is, I believe she was 23. So she was between 20 and 23 at this point in 2014 when she's still actively going to the doctor. She would bring the stuffed animals, bring a doll, something to help ease her anxiety. And while they were at these doctor appointments, where's the quote? While they were at these doctor appointments, quote from Gypsy said that Dee Dee told her to just stay in the wheelchair, be calm, play with your doll, and don't move your legs. Mind-boggling. As a child, you love your mother. You want to do what your mother says. You know your legs work. You know that you're able to walk around. In the Hulu series, The Act, they depict Gypsy getting up at night and walking around and having secret night snacks and drinking soda and whatnot. Gypsy, I don't think, has ever clarified on whether or not that's actually happened. Speculating it's true, though, she's up walking around at night and then going to all of these doctors and lying about the fact that she needs the wheelchair. There has to be an underlining fear of my mother is going to kill me. My mother is going to do something. There has to be some sort of physical threat there for her to be so absolutely terrified that she can't just get up and walk out of the chair in front of people. Another thing that's happening during this time frame, a lot of publicity, a lot of photos being taken, a lot of videos. Like I said, they're doing Make-A-Wish. They're meeting Miranda Lambert, Elijah Wood. These are big deal events. And every photo, every video, every interview, Dee Dee is touching Gypsy in some sort of fashion, holding her hand, resting her hand on her shoulder. There's some sort of physical contact being made. And at the time, it appeared to be a loving mother-daughter relationship. Oh, Dee Dee is so attentive. She's making sure she's near her in case she's having a seizure or she needs her EpiPen. Now looking back, knowing what we know and diving the psychology, we can't really deep dive the psychology of Dee Dee because there's not much known about her thought process besides what we're told was happening. Talk about a form of control. Any moment that Gypsy starts saying something that Dee Dee didn't like, she could squeeze her hand. Or she could just some sort of pressure on her to let her know stop talking. Absolutely wild. As a mother, I couldn't imagine being that controlling, that overbearing. I want my children to be their own individual people. I love seeing our children discover new things and get excited about new things. I want to try this, I want to try that, and want to be a gentleman and want to be a lady and be the best version of themselves. To suppress that, to satisfy the Munchausen by proxy need, like talk about the sacrifice being made. You are literally sacrificing your child's life to satisfy a mental illness. And I wonder if she even recognized, I'm meaning Dee Dee, if she even recognized that she was mentally ill. So over these multiple doctor visits, like I said, there were procedures being done. Some of those procedures involved gastrointestinal operations, eye procedures, and the removal of her salivary glands. I actually had to Google that. I didn't know you could remove salivary glands. Salivary. There are 3 major salivary glands within the human body, and then there's, I believe, 600 to 1,000 smaller or minor ones within the body. So even with her major ones removed, from my understanding in the Google research I did, the 600 to 1,000 is enough to continue to produce saliva within the mouth for eating, speaking, all of that. In all of this, Gypsy said the only thing that she knew was a lie was that she needed the wheelchair. She believed, well, that and eating, she knew that she could eat. She believed everything else. She believed that she was an epileptic. She believed that she had leukemia. She believed that, she was mentally slower than other people. Talk about the power of word. Her mother is telling her all of these things, and of course, medication. Gypsy believed all of it, though. She believed that she was not as mentally capable as everybody else her age because that's what her mother was feeding to her. I firmly believe breathing encouragement and love and laughter and light into our children. I never want to be the reason that my child looks at themselves in the mirror and say, I am not worthy enough. I can't do this. I can't do it because I'm not as smart as everybody else. I can't do it because I'm stupid, whatever it is. And in regards to the feeding tube that Gypsy had, like I said, Rod said that the feeding tube was installed when she was still an infant. And Gypsy said that it had to be changed every 6 months. In The Act on Hulu, towards the end of Dee Dee's life, she became a little bit more negligent towards those kinds of things, like the changing of the feeding tube. And in the show, it wasn't looking good. Gypsy has never commented on that. I don't know if it's true that there was some sort of neglect towards the feeding tube. Just the thought of that's there to help get food into your body. the infections that could happen, the bacteria. Not something you want to overlook. So Gypsy said it had to be changed every 6 months and that it was a slightly painful procedure for her. It wasn't something she enjoyed doing. She said that there was no anesthesia for the change. I have heard other people say that they've changed feeding tubes and it's not that painful of a procedure. I don't know though. I've never had one, thankfully. But for Gypsy, that was not a fun time. A lot of the medical paperwork said, upon mother's information. So doctors would write in the paperwork when they would visit the hospital that, upon mother's information, or upon history of mother. So that means there was no medical records to back up what Dee Dee was telling the doctors. They were definitely making note of that, though. And in those notes, one of the doctors said that Dee Dee was putting her hands over Gypsy's ears as she was talking to the doctor about her daughter's medical conditions. It's speculated that has happened more than once. That was the only doctor that actually made note of it, though, within the file. They also noticed that family history would change depending on which doctor they were speaking to. Gypsy said that there was a time where she was seeing a cardiologist, and then all of a sudden everybody in her family has died of a heart attack. At one point, before meeting Nick, the cops were called for a wellness check. In that wellness check, the police showed up, they talked to Dee Dee, they walked around the house a little bit, they met Gypsy. In the act on Hulu, it was a caseworker for CPS that showed up and talked to Dee Dee. And in that moment, Dee Dee gave Gypsy some kind of medication to sedate her a little bit, to present as not being present, not being aware. She was kind of out of it, looking around, unable to talk clearly. And in the show, the caseworker did her evaluation and she left. In real life, when the cops showed up, we don't know if that's the case. I wouldn't put it past Dee Dee to give Gypsy something to give the illusion of not being fully present. The cops came, did the wellness check, and they left, and nothing ever came of it. Gypsy is quoted to say that at that point where the cops left, the doctors weren't helping her, her mom was abusing her, she felt like she could go to absolutely nobody in this world. She said that I'm angry at the world and this is unfair. At this point, Gypsy has no idea how old she is. Her mother has fabricated multiple birth dates for her, and she keeps telling her, you're only 14, you're only 15, when in reality, she's in her 20s. As a child who has been abused the way that Gypsy has, going into adulthood, having no real time frame of how old she is, saying that she's angry at the world and it's unfair, like, I get that. I remember being a little girl and feeling so frustrated because I had really no emotional support. There was a lot of berating, a lot of anger in my childhood. And I had thoughts of, I hate it here. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. I wish someone just gave a fuck about me. I could not imagine how bad it was for Gypsy in those moments.